Judge, would a distraught father have a chance to say something?
Go ahead, sir.
I would ask you to grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with this demon.
What would you do if a child predator targeted your family? Would you trust the justice system or take matters into your own hands? For some, the choice has been clear. For many child predators, this has become their tragic fate. Parents frustrated with the law's limitations, taking justice into their own hands. In other cases, it wasn't the victims' families who delivered justice, but strangers who felt compelled to act. Join us in this video as we uncover the stories of 7 child predators who met justice at the hands of those who believed the law wasn't enough. Number 7. Klaus Grabowski. In 1981, Maran B.M., a German woman from Lübeck, made headlines for a shocking act of vigilante justice. She walked into a courtroom during the trial of Klaus Grabowski, the man accused of raping and killing her 7-year-old daughter Anna, and shot him dead. This act sent shockwaves across Germany and divided public opinion. Marianne's life had always been turbulent. Born on June 3, 1950 in Sarret, a small town in West Germany, she grew up in a strict household. Her father, a former member of the Waffen-SS, was often drunk and aggressive. Her parents eventually divorced, and Marianne's relationship with her mother and stepfather was strained. At just 16, she was kicked out of the house, left to navigate life on her own by the time she was 22. Maren had already endured immense hardships. She had given up 2 children for adoption, suffered abuse, and struggled to find stability. When her 3rd child, Anna, was born in 1972, Maren was determined to keep her, but raising a child as a single mother was far from easy. She worked long hours at a bar, often taking Anna along. Friends described their relationship as distant. Anna, they said, seemed more like a little adult than a child. In May 1980, everything fell apart. Anna, upset after an argument with her mother, skipped school and visited Klaus Grabowski, a man known to have cats she loved playing with, and also with criminal records of harassing young girls. What Anna thought would be a restful time, there would end up being tragic with Grabowski. It remains unclear whether she was assaulted. However, investigators discovered that Grabowski had kept Anna at his home for hours. Before ultimately strangling her, he then placed her body in a cardboard box and abandoned it on the bank of a nearby canal. That same evening, Grabowski was arrested after his fiancée informed the authorities he admitted to kill Anna, but he denied harassing her. Instead, he offered the bizarre explanation that Anna sought to blackmail him by attempting to seduce him and saying she would call the police to accuse him of harassment if he didn't give her money. Marianne was infuriated by this story and would carry out her revenge. The trial in 1981 was supposed to bring justice for Anna, but on the 3rd day, Marianne brought a small pistol into the courtroom, sitting in silence. She watched as Grabowski spoke, then stood up, aimed the gun, and fired 7 times. 6 bullets hit him on the spot. Marianne made no attempt to flee. She put the gun down and surrendered. The courtroom shooting divided the nation. Some saw her as a grieving mother pushed to the brink, while others criticized her for taking the law into her own hands. Marianne's trial began in 1982. While initially charged with the court, later reduced it to manslaughter, believing her actions were not premeditated. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but served only 3 after her release. Marianne's life remained complicated. She married in 1985 and moved to Ghana with her husband, but the marriage ended in divorce. She later worked in Sicily as a hospice aide before being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, returning to Germany in the early 1980s. She spoke openly about her actions, admitting she had planned the shooting to ensure Grabowski couldn't spread lies about her daughter. In 1996, at just 46 years old, Marianne died from cancer. She was buried beside Anna in Lübeck. A mother and daughter reunited in death after a life marked by tragedy. For Marianne, only immediate justice could ease her anguish, leading her to take matters into her own hands. The next story will make you wonder if sending your child to classes is worth the risk, or if keeping them close is the safer choice. Number 6. Jeff Ducate. Said a parent's greatest joy is providing the best opportunities for their child. But for Gary P.L., he found himself questioning whether sending his son to classes had been a terrible mistake. Born on November 10, 1945 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Gary grew up surrounded by the warmth of a community rooted in family and tradition. By the 1980s, he was a father of 4. Saint to remain a steady presence in his children's lives despite being separated from their mother. But in 1984, a nightmare unfolded that no parent could ever foresee, forever altering the course of his life. His son Jode, just 11 years old, was a typical boy with a love for adventure, enrolled in karate classes. Jody's teacher, Jeffrey Deuce, seemed trustworthy at first, but for over a year, Deuce abused that trust, hiding his crimes behind a facade of mentorship when Deuce kidnapped Jode in February 1984. It wasn't just a criminal act, it was an attack on the very core of Gary's being. As a father, Deuce's betrayal didn't just stop with abduction. He took Jode to Anaheim, California, where the abuse escalated in horrifying ways. The nation held its breath as law enforcement raced against time to find the boy. A glimmer of hope came when Jode was allowed to call his mother. That single call unraveled Deuce's plans and led police to their motel. Jode was rescued and brought back to Baton Rouge, but the scars of what he had endured ran deep for Gary. The return of his son was bittersweet relief mingled with rage as the details of Jody's ordeal surfaced. It wasn't just about the kidnapping. It was the knowledge that someone had inflicted such pain on his child. On March 29, 1984, Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport became the backdrop for an unforgettable and shocking moment, as Deuce was escorted off a plane by Deputy Swing. Gary waited nearby, his emotions boiling over with a .38 caliber revolver hidden in his jacket. He stepped forward, spinning from a bank of payphones. In one explosive second, he shot Deuce in the head, ending the man's life before the cameras of a local news crew. The echoes of that gunshot traveled far beyond the airport. Across the nation, people watched the footage in shock. Some condemned Gary's actions, calling them lawless. Others, especially parents, understood his rage. All too well in the chaos that followed. Gary was arrested, his face etched with pain and defiance. "If somebody did it to your kid, you'd do it too." He sobbed a statement that resonated deeply with many, though initially charged with second-degree murder. Gary's case took an unexpected turn. His lawyers argued that he was not a criminal, but a broken father driven to the brink by the horrors inflicted on his son after a plea deal. Gary received probation, avoiding jail time altogether. Some saw this as a failure of justice, while others believed it was a win for parents everywhere who feared for their children's safety. The video of Deuce's death spread widely, appearing in documentaries and news reports. It became symbol of the complicated emotions surrounding justice and revenge, sparking debates about what is right and wrong. Gary never regretted his actions. Even years later, he said he would do it all over again if he had to. Now, moving on, summer camps are supposed to be a time of fun and carefree enjoyment for kids, offering parents peace of mind. However, the next story paints a whole new different picture. Number 5. Daniel Mark. Driver Ellie Nessler was a mother whose grief and fury sparked a nationwide debate about justice vigilantism and how far a parent might go to defend their child. Her story began far from the courtroom in the rugged terrain of Jamestown, California. Born on August 2, 1952, Ellie grew up as the eldest of 3 daughters. In a coal miner's family, life was anything but easy. From a young age, she learned to operate tractors, dig ditches, and repair cars, chores that shaped her into a woman of remarkable resilience. Her mother later reflected on those early years, noting that they forged a strength in Ellie few could rival. Ellie's adulthood was a whirlwind of hardship and fleeting hope. A brief marriage ended in divorce before she met Bill Nessler. A gold miner, together, they chased dreams of fortune to Liberia, drawn by the promise of gold during a West African boom. There, Ellie gave birth to a daughter while caring for her firstborn, Willie. But their adventure turned to tragedy as civil war engulfed the region, fearing for her children. Ellie returned to California, leaving her husband behind and carving out a hard scrabble life. Chopping wood and relying on welfare, life darkened further when Willie, then just 7, began exhibiting strange behaviors. After attending a summer camp, it wasn't until a sleepover with his aunt that he confided the horrifying truth. Daniel Mark, a dishwasher at the camp, had used him. Ellie's heartbreak deepened as it came to light that Willie wasn't Driver's only victim. 3 other boys had also suffered under his predatory actions. Driver's history was equally Disturbing despite prior convictions for child molestation, letters from church members had secured him probation. The justice system's failure to protect the vulnerable burned in Ellie's mind as she watched the legal process grind forward on April 2, 1993. The simmering rage reached its boiling point inside a Jamestown courtroom, with drivers sitting mere feet away. Ellie pulled a gun and fired 5 shots into his head and neck. The scene was over in seconds, but the repercussions would echo for years. The nation erupted into debate. Was Ellie a protective mother driven to desperation? Asian, or a vigilante undermining the rule of law? Ellie's initial defense leaned on sympathy. Her legal team painted her as a grieving mother who'd snapped under unimaginable pressure. However, revelations of methamphetamine used during the shooting and her criminal history, auto theft as a teen, began to erode public support. Eventually, she pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter, serving 4 years of a 10-year sentence. While Ellie took justice into her own hands, the next story reveals someone else who took matters into their own hands, delivering judgment on behalf of the victim in a shocking turn of events. Number 4. Theodore Dyer. Theodore Dyer, born in the 1950s, lived a quiet life in Grand Haven, Michigan, with his girlfriend to his neighbors. He appeared friendly, a man who waved hello and chatted casually when Mary, a single mother, moved into the apartment next door with her children. Dia and his girlfriend seemed welcoming almost too much, so Mary trusted them. Never. Imagining the nightmare that would unfold in June 2013. Her 99-year-old daughter was in Dee's apartment when a mother's intuition told Mary something was wrong. She didn't knock, she walked in. What she saw stopped her cold Dee assaulting her child. Shock turned to rage as Mary grabbed her daughter and fled at home. She demanded to know the truth. The little girl's tears confirmed Mary's worst fears. This had happened before Mary called 911 and Dee's mask of normalcy was ripped away in court. He was convicted of first-degree criminal conduct and sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison for Mary and her daughter. It was a relief, but also a reminder that nothing could undo the damage he had caused. Prison life for Dee was short-lived. Inmates have their own code, and crimes against children are at the bottom. It didn't take long for Dares P to catch up with him inside the walls of Sagar Correctional Facility. Stephen Sanderson, his cellmate, took it upon himself to ensure Dee would never hurt another child one day. Sanderson wrapped his hands around Dee's neck and ended his life when asked why he did it in court. Component placement. Sanderson replied that Dee harassed kids and was trying to justify the behavior, and Steve wasn't having any of that. The news of Dee's death reached Mary and her daughter. Mary wept, but not entirely out of sadness. It wasn't that she wished death on him, at least not openly, but there was relief in knowing he was gone, that he could never hurt another child again, from a prison cell to the halls of a hospital. The next story takes us into a world where trust is paramount. Being a doctor is often considered one of the most noble callings. But this case reveals a physician who shattered that trust in unimaginable ways. Number 3. Larry Nassar. Larry Nassar, once a respected doctor for the U.S. women's national gymnastics team, became the embodiment of betrayal and abuse. His actions were not impulsive, but deliberate and methodical, stretching over years. Cloaked in the trust of his position, Nassar hid his cruelty behind the facade of medical care, preying on those who relied on him the most. When his victims finally had the chance to confront him, the courtroom became a crucible of pain and courage. Over 150 women and girls, including some of the nation's most celebrated athletes, recounted their stories of abuse. Their words shattered the pretense Nassar had hidden behind, exposing the depths of his cruelty yet. But even as they spoke, Nassar sat there, his expression cold and detached, as if their suffering barely registered. The charges against him painted a horrifying picture. Possession of child evidence tampering. Nassar's list of crimes seemed endless. Investigators uncovered tens of thousands of explicit images, some featuring Nassar himself committing unspeakable acts. Though over 250 cases of abuse were reported, only a handful reached the courtroom. It was enough the stories shared by survivors turned the trial into a moment of national reckoning. But amidst the heartbreak, a father's fury stole the spotlight. Randall Margraves, a man already crushed by the knowledge of what Nassar had done to his 3 daughters, could no longer contain his rage, as victim after victim shared their pain. Margraves asked the judge for one simple request. A moment alone with Nassar when the judge denied him, something inside him snapped. He lunged at Nassar, his anger spilling over in an instant. The courtroom erupted as security officers restrained Margraves, pulling him away before he could reach the man who had caused so much harm. The scene was chaotic, yet many watching couldn't help but understand his reaction to them. This wasn't just an outburst. It was the cry of a father pushed to his breaking point. Later, Margraves stood before the judge and apologized. His voice trembled, but his words carried the weight of a father's love and despair. The judge, moved by his sincerity, chose CH not to penalize him, while this case saw a father seeking justice for his child. The next story unfolds differently. Here, it wasn't a parent, but a complete stranger, an offender with no connection to the case who took justice into their own hands. Number 2. Christopher Llewell. Christopher Llewell, a name already shrouded in infamy, found himself caught in a storm of chaos, one he hadn't planned but seemed destined to face. Llewell was no stranger to the legal system. His history was a trail of wrongdoing spanning from fraud to violence. Yet it was his latest charge that had landed him in court once again, a horrifying crime against a 4-year-old girl. He had been staying at a home where the child, along with 2 other children, was present. The weight of his actions had earned him a sentence of 7 to 15 years in prison. Yet the punishment did little to silence the disgust surrounding his name. On the day of his latest hearing, the courtroom was thick with tension. Journalists whispered among themselves. Legal teams shuffled papers, and other defendants awaited their turn. Before the judge, Llewell, flanked by security guards, was seated in the defendant's area. For all his crimes, he appeared calm, almost as if the weight of his deeds couldn't touch him. But chaos doesn't give warnings among the other defendants waiting for their cases to be heard. Was Josiah Davies, a man with a reputation for violence, known for his explosive temper and history of altercations. Davies had been a figure of caution within the prison system. Why he turned his attention to Llewell that day remains a mystery, but the courtroom quickly learned that Davies had no intention of holding back, as Llewell sat beside him, unaware of the brewing storm. Davies moved. The attack was sudden and brutal. A flash of rage, unleashed in seconds. Davies broke free from his restraints, lunging at Llewell with fists flying. The first blow sent shockwaves through the courtroom by the time anyone could react. Davies had landed several more punches, his shouts echoing off the walls. Security officers scrambled to contain the situation, wrestling Davies to the ground. While others moved to shield Llewell, the room erupted into chaos. Journalists dropped their pens, some retreating, others rushing to capture the unfolding violence. Legal teams and bystanders stood, frozen, their faces a mix of shock and horror. Llewell, visibly shaken and blooded, was pulled out of harm's way and rushed to safety. His legal team surrounded him, shouting orders to ensure his protection. Paramedics arrived shortly after, escorting him to a nearby hospital. Reports later confirmed that his injuries were minor, but the psychological impact of the assault was clear in his pale, trembling frame as he was whisked away. Meanwhile, Josiah Davies showed no signs of regret. Even as officers pinned him down, he thrashed and shouted obscenities. His fury unrelenting, his outburst had brought the entire courtroom to a standstill. The judge, shaken by the violence, called for an immediate recess and ordered the room cleared. Davies was dragged away, his fate sealed by his actions. Solitary confinement awaited him. Along with new charges of assault and battery, legal experts speculated that the attack could lead to a transfer to a maximum security prison, adding years to his sentence. But for Davies, the punishment seemed irrelevant. Whatever fueled his rage against Llewell burned brighter than the consequences. The fallout from the attack left its mark on everyone in the room. For Llewell, it was a rare moment where he was on the receiving end of violence, a taste of the fear and helplessness he had inflicted on others for Davis. It was an act of impulsive vengeance that might have brought him fleeting satisfaction, but guaranteed harsher consequences just when you think you've seen it all. The next story shows how some victims carry their pain for years, waiting for a child to strike back when no one expects it. Number 1. Richard Gross. Richard Gross, an 80-year-old man who once shared meals and laughter with the Fu family, harbored a terrible secret that eventually shattered their trust. Gross had been a family friend for years, even serving as a babysitter for young Tyler Fu. But behind this friendly facade lay years of abuse that forever changed Tyler's life. It all started when Tyler was just 8 years old. What seemed like innocent babysitting turned into a nightmare that stretched until Tyler turned 15 for years. Tyler carried the weight of the pain in silence. It wasn't until 2019, after seeing an article on that his wife shared with him, that he finally faced what he had been trying to forget. At 29, Tyler decided it was time to speak up. He reported Gross to the police, setting off a legal process that dredged up years of buried trauma. The case against Gross was damning. He faced 26 felony charges, for all tied to his years of betrayal against Tyler. But when the case reached its climax, Gross took an Alfred plea. This plea allowed him to avoid admitting guilt while acknowledging the evidence against him was strong enough for a conviction. In exchange, he avoided prison, receiving a suspended sentence ranging from 60 to 180 months. He would serve no time unless he broke probation terms, which included living far from schools, avoiding an alcohol, and registering as an offender for life. The sentencing hearing, held on October 2nd, was a tense affair. Tyler was there hoping for some sense of justice after all he had endured. But as the judge announced the suspended sentence, it felt like a punch to the gut. The idea of Gross walking out of court free, after everything he had done, was too much for Tyler to handle. As Gross prepared to leave with his wife and attorney, Tyler's anger boiled over. All the years of pain and frustration erupted in a single uncontrollable moment. Tyler stood up at his emotions overwhelming him and landed a punch square on Gross's face. The force knocked Gross to the ground, leaving him briefly unconscious. Chaos broke out in the courtroom. Security rushed in to control the situation, while Gross's wife, visibly shaken, pointed out that her husband's glasses had been shacked. In the altercation, Gross was taken to a hospital shortly after complaining of dizziness and briefly blacking out. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Tyler was arrested on a misdemeanor battery charge. The emotional weight of the situation hung heavy in the air, a raw reminder of the scars Tyler carried later through his lawyer. Tyler admitted he regretted his actions. He explained that the sentencing had overwhelmed him with frustration and rage. While the act of punching Gross had felt like a release in the moment, Tyler acknowledged it wasn't the right thing to do. Still, he couldn't hide his deep disappointment with a system that allowed Gross to walk free. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.